Let's now explore some more features of the for loop and also create a somewhat more useful example. And one of the most used applications of for loops is to loop through arrays. So let's get back the array that we were using before. So where is that? So I mean the one where we talked about objects. Yeah, this one. So go to this lecture about Introduction to Objects and then grab this Jonas array. And maybe you didn't write it back then, but then you can just write it right now. Okay, and so now we can use a for loop to loop through this array. And let's say for now that we wanted to individually log every element of the array to the console. So very simple. All we want to do is to log these 5 elements here. So let's write a for loop. And as always, we start with the counter. So let, and now a traditional counter variable name has been I for a long time. And so let's use that here as well. So just I, and this time we need to start it at 0. And that's because the array is 0 based when it comes to reading elements out of the array. Remember? And this will make sense once we actually write the code of this loop. Let's now actually skip the condition for now. So we're going to deal with that a little bit later. And so now updating the counter is going to work exactly the same as before. So since we want to log all of the elements, we need to update the counter variable simply by 1. And so again, we use ++. Okay, and now let's write our loop here itself. So console.log. And remember, all we want to log to the console is each element of the array. And so without the loop, we would write that like this. So Jonas 0, right? And then let's do that outside. So we would do this, this, and then all the way to number 4, right? So let's comment this out, but this is helpful to see what kind of code we want to achieve. So again, we want to start at Jonas 0, which is the first element. Jonas 1 is this one, then 2, 3, and 4. And so that's the reason why we started the counter at 0, because that's the first element that we want to get. It's Jonas 0. And so here, instead of hard coding the 0, of course, we are going to use our counter variable. So, and that's I. And now the trickiest part here is the condition. And so that's why we left it for the end. But now we need to actually tackle it. So for how long do we want to keep this loop running? Well, it should run when I is 0, right? It should also run when it's 1, 2, 3, and 4, because 4 is the last element. But when it's 5, it should no longer run, right? And that's because Jonas at 5 does not exist. Let's just write that. Does not exist. And so that means that the I counter variable should always stay below 5. So let's write that here. So I should stay below 5. And so with this, as soon as the counter variable is updated to 5, then the next iteration of the loop will not run anymore. So let's try this. And here it's of course not Jonas, it's Jonas array. So let's actually change the name up here in the array itself. Try that again. And yeah, we get a log of each of the elements in the array. So all of the 5 of them. Great. But there's actually still one problem with this, which is that we hard-coded the length of the array here with 5. So let's now say that we add another element. Let's say just true. And so if we try this now, do you think that true will be logged here as well? Well, it will not, because of course we are still telling JavaScript that I should stay below 5. And so it will not print the array at position number 5, which does now exist. So now we do have Jonas at position 5, right? And so the solution to this is to not hard code the value here, but to compute this value. So basically to get it from JavaScript itself. And how can we get this number? Well, actually this 5 is simply the length of the array, right? Not of this one anymore, but of the original one. So this array has a length of 5. And so 5 is exactly the number that we put here. And so we can simply replace the hard-coded value with a dynamically calculated one. And that's Jonas.length. Remember? So let's try that. And indeed, it still works. And if I now go back to adding something else, like true, then Jonas.length will now be 6. And that of course happens automatically, and we don't have to manually change any code in that loop. So now indeed true also appears here in our log. Great. Let's now also log something else here. Let's say the type of the variable. So type of Jonas I. And I hope that this part here makes sense. So the fact that we're using the counter variable here to retrieve all the elements of the array. So now let's say, so string, string, number, string, object. So remember how I said that an array is in fact an object, and here we have the proof of that. And then finally the last one is of course a Boolean. Okay, so I hope that this logic here made sense. And so this is, in a nutshell, how we loop arrays using the for loop. Now, what we did here was only to read values from an array. But now let's also at the same time create a new array which will contain this type of each of the elements. So basically this. All right. So again, what I want to do now is to create a new array which will contain all the types for all these elements. And if that sounds a little bit useless, then just keep in mind that these are all just educational exercises. So I designed them to show you how these different features of the language work. So in the real world, we would probably not create an array with types of variables. But this is excellent to show you how to create a new array based on the values of one original array. So to do that, we start by creating a new empty array outside of the loop. And let's do that here after this one. So I will call this one types. And now I think this is something we didn't do before, which is to simply create an empty array. And all we have to do is to basically create an array with the usual syntax, but without any element inside of it. And so now we have to go here to the same loop, because this new array types will be based on the Jonas array. So it's going to have the same length. And so we can use the exact same loop that we used to read data from the Jonas loop, also to construct this new types array. So let's say types at position I should be equal to type of Jonas at position I. And remember that this works because we can essentially do this. So we could do it again without the loop and say types 0 is equals string. So this would work, right? And so of course it also works with the index number here dynamically. And so that's exactly what we're doing here in the exact same way as we read data from the Jonas array. Right? So in iteration 0, we will have type 0 equals type of Jonas 0. Then in the next iteration, we will have types 1 equals type of Jonas 1, and then 2, 3, 4, and 5. All right. So just to see if that works, let's then log to the console this newly created, or to be more accurate, this newly filled array. So let's see. And indeed, now we get this array, which has exactly the types that we can see here as well. So string, string, number, string, object, and Boolean. So these 6 that we also have here, which means that we achieved our goal here. Now, this is just one way of filling an array. And let me write that down here. Filling the types array. And here we do basically reading from Jonas array. But this is just one way of doing it. So let's comment out this one and do it in another way. And do you remember how to add elements to an array in another way? Well, we could use the push method, right? So that would be types dot push. And remember that push adds a new element to the end of the array. And so here we now need to pass in the element that we do want to add on to the array. And so that's again type of Jonas at position I. So of the current counter. And so if we try this now again, we should get the same. And it's important that we add the new element to the end of the array and not to the beginning. So we really need to use push here and not unshift. So I think that this way of doing it here is actually a little bit cleaner. But if you prefer this first way here, then of course you can just use that one as well. But what matters here is that we really understood the logic of how to construct all the different parts of this for loop in order to loop the array. So it starts with the counter being 0 because that's the first element of the array. And then this condition here, which specifies that the current index always needs to stay below the length of the array that we're looping through. And then in the loop itself, we always get the current element using the current counter, which is going to go from 0 to the length of the array minus 1, basically. All right. And to make sure we really get this, let's try another, maybe more practical example. So let's go back to having an array of birth years. So 1991, 2007, let's say, 1969, and 2020. And now what we want to do is to calculate the ages for all these 4 birth years here. And we want to store them in a new array. And that's a very common type of operation, which we actually already did before, but without using loops. So essentially that's what we did in the tip calculator challenge. Here. So here we had an array of 3 builds, and then we manually calculated the tip for each of them. So manually we specified the index 0, 1, and 2, and created a new array based on these values. But in the real world, we would have used a loop to do that. And so that's what we will do now. Okay, just with another, a bit more simple example. Years is the array which contains the birth years. And now let's create another, and again, empty array, which will then hold the ages. And so what we're going to do now is to loop through years and then fill up these ages array. So, 4. And then once more, let's define the counter at 0 for the same reasons that we did it before. And it's not a problem that this counter variable here has exactly the same name. Then the condition is also going to be the same. And actually the whole loop always kind of looks the same when we loop over an array. So now here the difference is that it's of course years dot length. And then at the end we, as always, increase the counter by 1. And now what we need to do is to calculate the age of the current year. So that's going to be 2037. So as always, that's the year that we're currently in, let's say, and then minus the current birth year. So how do we get that? We say years at the current loop position. Okay, so that's nothing new, I hope, now at this point. Okay, so we have this calculation now, and now we want to add it to this new empty array. So we say we want to push it to that array. And so we use the push method to do that. So ages dot push. And so this is the value that we want to push into this empty array. And that's actually it. So let's check it out in the console. And here we go. So just to confirm, 2037 minus 1991 is of course 46. And let's just do it with 27 as well, 2007, I mean. And so that's 30, which is this one. And so this array result is correct indeed. So what we essentially did is this. We cannot do operations between simple values and an array. So that I showed you earlier, right? We cannot do 2037 minus the years array. That will just give us not a number. And so here in this loop, we basically did it individually. So we did the calculation one by one. In each iteration of the loop, we calculated 2037 minus this year and then added it to the first position in the ages array. Then we did 2037 minus this and put it at the end of the ages array again. And then the same for this one and for 2020. Great. So that is a very, very useful and important application of the for loop. And now to finish, let's learn about two important statements for loops. And that's the continue and the break statement. Let me just write that here. Continue and break. And let's start with continue. So continue is to exit the current iteration of the loop and continue to the next one. On the other hand, break is used to completely terminate the whole loop. So let's see two quick examples for that. And let's go back to actually this first loop that we had here, where we looped this Jonas array. So I will just copy this because we already learned how to loop through the array. And now I'm just interested in showing you how continue and break work. So let me delete this and this as well. And now let's say that for some reason, we only wanted to print elements to the array that are strings. And the continue statement is perfect for this. Because again, with continue, we can exit the current iteration of the loop. So what we can do here is to say, if the type of the current element, so of Jonas I, is not a string, then continue. And so that's how we write the continue statement. It's really just this continue keyword. So again, what we want to do here is to only log strings to the console, which means that everything else should basically be skipped. And that's what we do here. So we say if the type of the current element, so that's this one here, so if the type of the current element is not a string, then continue, which again means that the current iteration of the loop is exited and then the next one starts immediately. So let's just write some other note here to the console just so we know what we're doing here, like only strings, because otherwise the output here is going to start to look a little bit confusing. But anyway, let's test this now. And indeed, we only get strings now. So these three are strings and all the other ones are not strings. So this number, this array, and this boolean, so they will now not get printed because we basically skipped them. For example, that age number, which is 46 here, so the third element, does have the type number here, right? So it's not a string, and so this here will be true because, of course, number is different than string. And so this is true, and so this code here will run. And what continue will do is that it will immediately exit the current iteration. And so this line of code here will not be executed in the current iteration. It will not even be reached. Okay? And now finally, let me just show you how break works. And remember that what break does is to completely terminate the whole loop, so not just the current iteration. So what we want to do now is to log no other elements after we found a number. So essentially, after a number is found, which will be this 46 here, nothing else should be printed. So let's do that. And I will again copy all of this. And so let's say here, break with number. So let's translate the logic that we just said into the code. So as soon as a number is found, we want to break the loop. So our if condition here should be type of Jonas I, so the current element, if it's equal to a number, so now that's number, then break. Now, okay, let's see the result here. And indeed, that's exactly what we wanted. So after the first number is found, which is this 46 here, nothing else is printed. So in this iteration, where the number is found, not even this line of code is printed anymore, and then the loop is terminated completely. All right, now this might not sound very practical, but believe me, there are some important use cases for continue and break. It's just hard to create some small and isolated code examples to show you just how useful they can be. But anyway, I wanted to let you know that continue and break exist. But the most important takeaway from this lecture is definitely to understand how we can loop through arrays using this kind of logic here. Okay, so this one here is really important that you understand this snippet of code.